agradeciendo a los que hacen que esto sea posible, a los que hacen que esta juntura sea posible. De manera que agradezco al staff del Foro Centroamericano de Periodismo, a Víctor Melara, a Víctor Calderón, a Cris Caquins, a Margarita Marroquín, a Sergio Pacheco, a Nelson Rauda, a Katia Recinos, a Daniel Reyes, Mauricio Sandoval, a Jonathan Yoc, a nuestros pasantes, Maynor Herrera, Andrea Godínez, Sofía Ordóñez, Ángel Estuardo, Miriam Toledo, Paula Alvarado. Agradezco además a la embajadora de España en Guatemala, María Clara Girbau, por su acompañamiento, y a Jesús Molina, director del Centro de Formación, y a su extraordinario equipo, por darnos cabida y por alojarnos en su casa. A los cooperantes y al cuerpo diplomático que nos han acompañado con su generosidad y su compromiso con la existencia de estos espacios que generan debate y fortalecen una prensa libre e independiente. A nuestros proveedores y a nuestros socios en la travesura de esta fiesta, les agradezco mucho y pido para ellos un aplauso. Digo también que pese a su explícita solicitud de no hacerla subir a esta tarima, pido que suba a esta tarima Ana Beatriz Lazo, la coordinadora y la directora de una orquesta grande, que sería además una orquesta desafinada sin su presencia. Ana, por favor. Gracias, Ana.
Gracias. Estoy viendo si le puedo copiar a Carlos. No, nada, gracias. Me encanta ver tanta gente con una mirada esperanzadora que viene a llenarse de herramientas y a que tengamos estas discusiones y reflexiones sobre las realidades de nuestros países y de nuestra región y salgamos de aquí llenos de esperanza, pues, y de valentía para enfrentar lo que se viene. Así que, no, yo nada más que agradecerles a todos por su interés, por estar aquí, porque ustedes permiten que el foro siga sucediendo y en especial a mi equipo que son mi mano derecha, izquierda y todo. Así que, pues nada, gracias.
Seré breve. Pronuncio desde hace 14 años un discurso final para agradecer Hola. Veamos si ahora funciona. Pronuncio desde hace 14 años un discurso final para agradecer y para hacer recaudo de la jornada del Foro Centroamericano de Periodismo. Y esta es la primera vez que debo usar anteojos para hacerlo. Ocurre precisamente en la edición en que la media de edad de quienes acuden ha bajado de manera notable. Y eso evidencia dos cosas: que quienes tramamos hace ya muchos años este encuentro de periodistas no somos más los muchachos que fuimos, que envejecemos, pero también que hay una potente, amplia y diversa generación de relevo, muchachos y muchachas, que vienen cosechando lo que sembramos y a su vez sembrando para que otros que vienen llegando cosechen. Comenzamos así. La maestra Mónica González nos presentó a 3 periodistas muy jóvenes, a Maritrini Sea, a Gabriela Pizarro y a Brian Avelar, con carreras y convicciones bastante sólidas. Y seguimos luego con las mismas 3 personas que hace 14 años inauguraron el primer foro centroamericano de periodismo. 3 hipotes o 3 patojos de espíritu, digo, que siguen conservando la enjundia y el brío pese a exilios, despojos y cárceles. Carlos Dada, Carlos Fernando Chamorro y José Rubén Zamora. Visitamos la experiencia salvaje de una Venezuela que tiene años advirtiéndonos cosas a los latinoamericanos, de la mano de los periodistas venezolanos Emilia Díaz Stroh y Boris Muñoz. Revisamos la tribulada y descalza historia democrática de Centroamérica, desde la perspectiva de las ciencias sociales, con los doctores Héctor Lindo y Ilka Treminio, e intentamos sacar algo en limpio del escenario que podemos imaginar en ese futuro de amenazas prometidas que es Donald Trump. Aprendimos a catar periodismo y a entender su método de la mano de Edwin Segura, articular investigaciones profundas de la mano de María Teresa Ronderos, a entender el potencial de la inteligencia artificial para ponerla al servicio de nuestras investigaciones, a pulir el arte de la opinión, ese género huidizo con Boris Muñoz, a buscar pistas en nuestra historia para imaginarnos el futuro, con el doctor Héctor Lindo, a curar relatos escritos con luz, de la mano del fotoperiodista Michael Camber. Brindamos con los nicas, cantamos con ellos, asistimos a exposiciones de fotos, estuvimos de nuevo juntos. En redes de periodistas y en redes de medios, compartiendo nuestros temores y nuestras esperanzas, y eso no es poca cosa en nuestros días. El futuro de nuestro oficio no pinta sencillo. Se ciernen amenazas desde todos los frentes, pero ante ellas la respuesta de nuestro oficio se ha paseado en este foro, en tanto se han paseado por aquí temibles jóvenes que no parecen dispuestos a permitir del poder monólogos, que reinventan el oficio y que lo han comprendido en circunstancias muy duras también. Bienvenidos, muchachos, bienvenidas, muchachas. Los necesitamos, ustedes hacen falta. Los esperamos, pues, el otro año en el 15º Foro Centroamericano de Periodismo. Gracias. Los dejo ahora con el siguiente moderador, nuestro editor multimedia, Nelson Rauda, que presenta el siguiente foro. Muchas gracias.
Le pido, buenas noches, le pido a María Teresa también, Ronderos, que pase acá. Les explico un poco la dinámica. Vamos a tener esta conversación en inglés para que Alan Rusbridger pueda seguir la conversación, y los que necesiten asistencia, porfa, agarren uno de los auriculares. So I'm going to get started by introducing the panel. Here with me in stage is María Teresa Ronderos, who's a reporter, editor, and director for the Latin American Center of Journalistic Investigation, CLIP. She's a member of the Gabo Foundation Council. She's a Maria Moores Cabot Award winner, Spain King Award winner, and for all of us, maestra, teacher. And joining us from London, and a late London night, is Alan Rusbridger. He is the chair of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism Steering Committee. Alan was editor-in-chief of Guardian News and Media from 1995 to 2015, and is now the editor of Prospect. And funnily enough, The Guardian was founded in 1821, which is the same year of the independence of our country, Central American country. So they've been doing this thing that we do for way longer than us. As Carlos Martinez was saying, let's start things slow. You know, newspapers in Central America are now unprofitable organizations that produce content the majority of people in our countries do not want to hear. Advertisers consider us toxic or at least risky. And journalists are harassed, prosecuted, and exiled by the governments they cover. So why do we cling to journalism? Alan, do you want to start?
I'll do my best, and I'm really sorry not to be with you. The fates were against us. Look, it is in many ways a dark period for journalism, for all the reasons you've just suggested. And sometimes I'm amazed when I go and speak to journalism schools that young people still come forward.
Can you hear us? We're having a small hiccup with the volume hearing you. Maria Teresa, do you want to start with that question? Why do we cling to journalism while we wait for Alan? I'm sorry.
I don't know why we cling to journalism. I really don't know, but I have been doing it for about 30 years or something, and I'm still stuck to it. I think that we still need, and more today than before, we feel very strongly that we analyze, we see, and there is need for good information. There's lots of information now. It's flowing all over the place, and yet people are really starving for good information. Good information, it's not easy to produce, and it's not easy to distribute. It's not easy to compete with people's time with good information, and yet we are there because we are completely certain that societies need quality information like they need air. It's a public good, like water. That is what information is.
Alan, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, is this clear? If you could, can you hear me now?
I can't hear.
You can hear me or not hear me?
Can you get closer to your mic? Maybe that's.
I will try.
Hear anything.
If I speak like this, can you hear me better?
No, we're not hearing anything.
I can speak like this.
Now?
Can you hear me now if I speak like this?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, if I speak like this?
Yeah.
Okay, I will try. First of all, I apologize for not being there tonight. The travel fates were against me. I agree with everything that Maria Teresa has just said, that I think we have learnt over the last 10 years that societies can't function without agreed facts. And I agree also that journalism is like a public service. It should be thought of as like a public service. And I think that realization is why people are still coming forward, incredibly brave people, incredibly resourceful people, to do this thing for which there are so many reasons not to do.
No, we're still having some troubles with the hearing.
I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me? I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me?
We're hearing you a little bit better now.
Can you hear me?
We're hearing you. Delay ahí que no va a funcionar. Arreglamos eso, quizá vamos a seguir así. Con las disculpas del caso. Decías, María Teresa, que nos aferramos a esto. Martín Caparrós dice mucho eso, que hay que hacer periodismo contra el público. Y lo primero que mencionabas en tu respuesta era que el periodismo es un public good, un bien público. No parece. No lo estamos viendo.
Those things that interest you. You don't read, I never read about sports. I don't care about sports. So I'm not never going to read about sports. And somebody else will never read something that it's not sports. So I think what we need to make sure is that we need to build a community around some information that we produce. And that community around that information is going to feed us and to feed that information. I don't think journalists have to think different. We are here and the audience is there. I think we have to build like a knowledge production community, and we all produce information because people don't want to be passive, just listening to whatever somebody tells them. They want to be active and participate, and they have a lot of information and a lot of knowledge. And we often don't take into account that. And that's why we get very alienated with the public. I know this is easier to say than to do. It's difficult to do, but I think that's the challenge. That's the drive. That's what we need to build together, to build like collectives of information that, and of news and of with the interest of people, because the audiences are segmented. We cannot unsegment them. They are already segmented. That's the way they work today. We don't have a mass audience anymore. That's what I think. I don't know if Alan agrees.
We'll try to get Alan later on when we can hear him properly. I just want to go back to your first answer. You said public good. Here in Central America, there are two English words that decision takers in the media fear, which is business model. The majority of us work in media almost entirely supported by grants. Advertising is essentially gone, and subscription models are not successful enough. Not right now. Is media sustainability possible in our countries?
I love that question because I think we keep hearing there is no business model. The media are not sustainable. We had Professor Rosenthal Alves singing a song, Unsustainable. He used to sing that song. And when we look at the media, I've created a media outlet some years ago. It's already 16 years old, Verdad Abierta. And El Faro has, 25 years old, 26 years old. And these are the media that were not sustainable. They are sustainable. I mean, what does sustainable mean? How many years is sustainable? And we see ProPublica has, I don't know, how many years has ProPublica? And The Guardian is not for profit. And it's, how many did you say?
1821.
100 and something years. So it's not true. It's not true. They told us that unless a media is a business, it's not sustainable. That premise is wrong. We see it over and over again. A media can be sustainable even though it's not a business. It's not making anybody rich, but it is producing information for 26 years like Alfaro, and many of you are already 5 years old, 10 years old. No, El Clip is 5 years old. And how are we surviving? I don't know. we survive with philanthropy, with our own ideas, with getting a little bit of subscription of whatever. So what I think is that the problem there in the bottom of the line is that for some period of time, because information was so scarce, it became a business. And a lot of people got very rich with that business because they were selling a scarce good, very scarce good. Today it's not scarce, it's very abundant. So it cannot be a business. In economics, whenever you have free something, it cannot be, it cannot be a business. And we still keep thinking as good capitalists, thinking that if it's not a business, it's not going to work. It needs to be a business. It doesn't need to be a business. Who invented that? So we don't need a business model. We need them to be sustainable. That's different than business model. And how are they sustainable? I don't know. Many, many strategies. I can tell you, one time I gave a workshop, together with a bunch of people in Mexico, we found 46 ways to make a living with a media. 46 different ways that I've seen in the world. So I do think that the problem is trying to say that information, it's a commercial good and not a public good. Information is a public good and it needs to survive. And we make it possible without business or with business. It doesn't matter. But I don't know, maybe I'm crazy about that.
I was reading your bio at the Clip website, and it says that you look for patrons. The word is mecenas, who believe well-done journalism helps to transform the world. I think you already answered that. There's no only way, but how do you think nowadays about finding patrons that find well-done journalism something worth funding?
I think Alan is now there. I think maybe we can
Can you speak now, Alan?
I'll try again. Can you hear me speaking
yes.
now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good.
Ah, fantastic. Well, thank you. And I apologize for not being there. Can I just build on what Maria Teresa was saying, because I think it's really important. Round about 2011, we were struggling at The Guardian, and we didn't know what the business model was going to be. And we had about 7,000 readers in during the course of a weekend. And on the Sunday morning, the moderator said to the readers, look, you're going to have to pay for The Guardian in some way. And I want you to all put your hands up. Who will pay for The Guardian as a private good? I will pay for The Guardian, but I would be most upset if I found my next door neighbor was reading it for free. And almost no hands went up in the audience. And I felt despair. I thought, this is what we've always suspected, that people will not pay. And Clay Shirky, who was not moderating the session, said, okay, different question. Who would pay for The Guardian as a public good so that your neighbor can read it and everyone in London can read it and everyone in the world can read it? And all the hands up went up in the audience. And it was a really difficult message. I took that back to the board of The Guardian, and they said, but that's like a charity. It's like a plastic begging bowl. We're taking adverts from Dolce & Gabbana, and you're asking us to beg for money. And it took some time before The Guardian could be convinced that this was real. When I took over The Guardian, there were 400,000 people paying. There are now 85 million people paying. And the reason I think that they want to pay is because, and I'm going to be immodest here, we were doing great journalism. So we were doing WikiLeaks, we were taking on tax avoiders, we were taking on corrupt policemen, we were taking on corrupt governments, we did the phone hacking story against Murdoch, we did the Edward Snowden story. And at the end of all that, the reader said, look, if you're going to do that kind of journalism, we will pay because we believe the world needs that. And it is sustainable. So I completely agree with Maria Teresa that there is a sustainable way of doing journalism, but it depends on great journalism. And if you lose the courage and if you lose the faith of the readers, they won't pay. But as long as you're doing journalism that they believe in the public good, for the public, so that everybody can read it, then I think there is hope.
Let me turn the screws a little bit on you and say, it's different to ask for an audience in New York or London to pay for journalism. We are in Guatemala, we are from El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica, and Honduras, and Colombia, and Latin America, where the capacity, the buying capacity that people generally have is significantly smaller. Is this, and I know you know this word from your work at the Reuters Institute, but is it worth to think about a paying audience, paying readers, when we're obviously from not only geographical but socio-economical polar opposites in a sense?
Yeah, well, I don't know. You would have to tell me. I don't want to. It would be impertinent of me to come and lecture you on how it should work in different parts of the world. But I do think the problem that we have at the moment is the creation of elite media. So that there is no problem with the New York Times or the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal. But what I think we have in America at the moment, and I once had a conversation with Dean McKay, the editor of the New York Times, probably the most successful subscription model. And he said, yeah, it's been great. He's an African-American dean. And he said, but I worry about the 97% of Americans who don't get the New York Times. And so you're creating a low information society. And I think we can see the results of what that means for America. So I think we have no option. Now, when I say 85 million people pay for The Guardian, some of them don't give very much. It may just be £5, £10. But if you get a big enough audience paying a small amount, I think the sums can add up. But as I say, I don't want to lecture you about whether that model works for Central America.
What about patrons? Especially thinking about, Alan said elite media. The founder of Amazon owns one of the most prestigious newspapers in the world. But in just this couple of weeks ago, he reportedly vetoed an editorial endorsement that the paper was going to make for Kamala Harris. So is that not an indictment of the patron model?
Well, it depends on the patron, and in this case, he's the owner. He's not a patron. He's not a philanthropist giving money to a media outlet because he believes on the importance of public information. I do believe that especially the Americans are incredibly generous. In CLIP, we have a lot of support from different American foundations, and they are completely convinced that the more we see the world and the more we see the problems in the world, the more we need better information. When millions of people, as Trump would say, billions and millions of people think that really the migrants are going to eat the cats and the dogs and invade all the cities and create havoc, and you can produce that kind of paranoia with false information and with repeating and a lot of mistakes, but traditional media, even liberal media. I think that there's a big problem with the integrity of media, and I think that's the big problem. And I think with artificial intelligence, the integrity of information is even more threatened. How are we going to know what's true and what's not true? Somebody was telling me, who's thinking about these issues, that we won't be able even to choose what information we want to read. They will tell us what information we need, which would be really scary. But I think that's our challenge as journalists, and that's why it's such an exciting time. We need to find ways to keep the integrity of information. And because I'm from CLIP, I think the only way is through collaboration. If we get together and we produce information together, it's going to build community and build trust. And that's what we're doing at El CLIP. And I do think there's a lot of rich, wealthy people and foundations, traditional foundations, and also public, members of the public that are willing to support that because they know what's at stake. We see what's at stake. You know, Britain made terrible decisions in 2016. The US made a terrible decision 3 days ago. And we know what happens when there's not good information.
Alan, you were talking about a low society, low information society. And that brings me to the problem of billionaires in tech giants. Social media seems sort of like a rigged game. Big tech is the best way for us to get massive reach. So we have to put our content in the meta companies, in X and TikTok. But this is an old debate that you mentioned in your book. Journalists get almost nothing in return in terms of money for the information that we place in these companies. Is there a way to get a piece of that pie? Is that something that we should still be thinking on, taking on the giants, taking money back from them?
Well, something went horribly wrong with the conversation with big tech in the last 5 years. And I think there were people within companies like Facebook and Google who were seriously engaged in working out how they could make the news better and how they could amplify our voice. And for reasons we needn't go into here, I think that all became fractured. And Facebook has effectively withdrawn from news altogether. Google is pursuing AI and really making news links to news organizations unnecessary. And I think we somehow have to find a way of rebooting that conversation. And I think those of us who lived through COVID, which was in a sense a dress rehearsal for climate change, we can remember how frightening that was, not knowing who to rely on for information, and how it makes public policy decisions almost impossible if you can't get enough people to accumulate around the facts. That's going to be so much worse in terms of climate change, or in terms of societies where, as is increasingly happening, people don't know who to trust or what to believe. It ought to be something where the news industry could re-begin that conversation with tech. And I don't think it should begin with a conversation about money, because that just puts them on the defensive. But I think there are leaders within those companies with whom we could begin to engage. And I would just finally add that I think the role of education in preparing young people to become digital citizens, so that by the time they're 15 or 16, they are equipped to find out, to make judgments about what is good information, what is bad information. I find it astonishing that we don't prepare young people to be more sophisticated readers of news. We're breeding generations of people who are completely ill-equipped. So I think that combination of re-engaging with the tech industry and education, I would start from the age of 6, I think, would be two measures that could be really significant.
Maria Teresa, where do you stand on the social media big tech debate? In the sense, you mentioned a very defiant narrative to capitalism, which is collaboration. What do we do with the billionaires that control the companies that we post journalism?
Well, they're defining who reads, what reads, and they're taking our news. And as Alan was saying, decisions with AI by Google of taking away even the links to the media. That's even more terrifying, because then they're getting all our information and people cannot even know where that information came from. They're closing up. For example, Meta closed out CrowdTangle, which was an instrument that allowed us to really know and study history of who had said what in Facebook, and that's closed too. So it is difficult. I do think that as a journalist, I think that what we need to do is to hold these big companies to account. We need to investigate those companies. We need to know how they engage in our countries. We need to expose what kinds of pressures they're putting, because the truth is that a number of countries, Australia, Brazil, are trying to negotiate with these big giants so that they actually pay the media for what they should be paying. And some of these conversations have gotten better, others haven't. Some of the laws that are trying to regulate media, these big tech media, so that they are more transparent, so that we know who is moderating those conversations, how we know how they make decisions. They're very obscure, very opaque. And I think that every time there is an effort by a country to try to regulate them, they exert a humongous effort. We just did a big investigation throughout the year about what happened with disinformation and elections during this super election year in Latin America. And we found some of these media outlets like Facebook publishing advertising that was full of disinformation without caring about it, or violating local laws, like, for example, the laws of, la veda electoral, when you cannot publish, they would just go trample all over it. And when the tribunal from Panama asked, look, you're violating our laws, they say, oh, but we have better laws. So that is something that we need to start really taking on, because we're too passive, and we have been so far too marveled with the big tech. We just love them.
This conversation does have the word hope in the title, so we probably are not the best at giving people hope, but you just mentioned something of your work, and I know, Alan, from the work at the Reuters Institute, the digital news report, which I tell everybody is like the Bible to know where where our business is going in next years. So I was very surprised, or it was very relieving to hear uses like El Chamo y la Pana from AI for Venezuelan. What trends, what exciting possibilities do you see of journalists experimenting with this, with AI, with internet, with new tools that we might learn from? Alan?
Well, I think the first reason for hope is that so many young people still want to go into journalism. I'm slightly amazed. I did a talk in Madrid last year to the people who were just joining the El País journalism school there, and I began by saying, look, there are all these reasons not to. This is a terrible profession. It's a terribly insecure profession. It's badly paid. There's low security, low esteem. You're all mad. Why are you doing this? And yet there they were. And I think there is an instinct, a vocation, a calling of people who just realize that societies can't work without these independent witnesses. And there's great work being done. I think that the field of data journalism, which didn't exist really 20 years ago, is extraordinary. The field of data visualizations. I think AI, of course, is a threat, and we can scare ourselves about that, but I think it will be a marvelous tool for journalists. I love the fact that the journalists are combining sound, video, words, that there are so many different ways of telling stories. So I think there is great innovation. And I just want to pick up on something Maria Teresa said, which the trend of young media organizations to begin by involving the readers and not just addressing them as passive consumers of news, and finding out how they can help and how we can tap into their expertise was, of course, pretty impossible until 20 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago. And I think it's such an exciting move. So I think sometimes I envy the journalists who are starting out at the age of 21, 22, because I think whereas when I started out, nothing really had changed much since 1821. We were using words on paper, separating the adverts. There was no reinvention possible. And I think to be part of a generation that can completely reinvent what we mean by journalism is so exciting.
Maria Teresa?
I agree with Alan. I am so glad to see somebody as optimistic as me. I do think that is the most exciting moment of journalism. For investigative journalism, we've never had such an amount of access to information that before we didn't have. We have tools, we have access to all kinds of information. If there's a closed country, we can find information about that closed country from another country. If there is a town we cannot go because it's so dangerous and we probably get killed if we go to that town, we can use satellite and we can use social media to know what's happening in that town as if we were there walking in that town. So I agree with Alan. I feel very envious of people who are starting and they're much more tech savvy than I am. But I think it's so exciting to be a journalist right now because there's so much you can do and investigate. And then the other thing that I totally agree with what you said, Alan, is about the education of the young people, of the very young, of the children, and of the people in high school. They should know how to use all these tools to verify and to be able to really discern which is bad, which is good information, which is bad. And we can also do a great job that way. The last thing is that now it's cheap to collaborate. It's easy to collaborate. At CLIP, we have put together investigations with 25 countries, I don't know how many journalists, and it costs very little because of all these free, Signal, WhatsApp, and it's amazing the leverage we can have when we put all our resources together to produce amazing information or amazing reports. I think the bad guys are already gone transnational long time ago. So we need to go transnational too, because we're a little bit late in doing that. But we're actually still doing it, and doing it in a collaborative way makes it super exciting. I think every project we embark on, it's like an adventure, and we never know where it's going to end, and it's super exciting. So I think I'm very optimistic. Even though the world it's terrible and things that are happening are very difficult, but I love to always repeat this saying by the Indian community in Colombia, indigenous community. They say, no somos machos, pero somos muchos.
Let me ask you both of you a question, because we're talking about relay, we're talking about passing the baton. What's the role of the people that still hold the baton? There's an up-and-coming generation of journalists, but I don't know how to say this better, so I'm going to be blunt. Can all dogs learn new tricks, or should them? Alan?
But the surprising thing I found at The Guardian was that sometimes the most adventurous journalists were the older ones. And they were, in a way, the most valuable people in the organization because they were tremendously adaptive and excited, but they also had journalist experience. And some of the younger people coming in knew how to use all the tools, but they had no journalistic experience. So the combination of the two was often the most exciting capability. I mean, to just build on what Maria Teresa was saying, I mean, when we first worked on WikiLeaks, I think at that point that was the biggest data dump anyone had ever seen. It was sort of millions of words, if not millions of documents, and no one had ever had to handle that kind of thing. We had to build a search engine that could look into these documents. And now that was 2008. So what are we? We're 16 years later. That's so easy now. Or the Snowden documents, 1 million documents, and so combining these new tools and the power that we have today with the experience and wisdom of older journalists, I think is an incredibly exciting and potent mix.
María Teresa?
When I was working at Open Society, we wanted to create a program which was called the Sacked Savvies, because a lot of older journalists have been sacked or fired from their organizations because they were too expensive. And they all started new media. They all started digital media. And it was wonderful to see them navigate this new world. And as Alan said, some of them are more adventurers than the younger one. But I think the best combination is the older and the young working together, because the young are, naturally digital and they move much faster and they, do things in a much faster way in the internet and understand and learn very, very fast. While the oldest journalist has more experience, has a lot of criteria, has lived probably difficult things, and sometimes we push, but sometimes we also stop because we believe that also people have to be careful, especially in places like Central America where you have such difficulty and danger. So older journalists are also sometimes the ones that can tell a younger journalist, be careful with these, you have to, don't stop doing what you need to do, but you can do it in a safer way. For example, for safety, it's also important to have old dogs, even though you can leave the new tricks for the younger generation.
I'm going to wrap it up briefly. I just wanted to, as we think about media organizations, Alan, in your book, you quote one of the Guardian owners, John Scott, saying that a newspaper is a business, but also an institution and an instrument of government. Do you think any of those definitions hold up today?
Yeah, I don't. I think I loved it when he said that a newspaper is more than a business, and what he was leading at there is, I think the best media organizations are the ones where journalists are effectively are empowered. They don't have to be in control. I mean, on the Guardian, we were lucky that the paper was put into a trust in the 1930s, and there is a Scott Trust which is there to protect the journalism, and the Scott Trust employs a commercial company to run the company, but the Scott Trust makes the decisions. And I think that is a fantastically powerful model. So I think it's always important to remember that, yes, it can be a business. Maybe sometimes it needs to be a business. We haven't talked about public service media today, public service broadcasting. But it has to be more than a business. And, we've seen what happens with someone like Jeff Bezos, who, was a great philanthropist in terms of taking on the Washington Post, but ultimately he cared more about his other businesses than he did about the Washington Post. And I would like to see Bezos do something like the Guardian and just put the Washington Post into a trust he could easily afford to do so. And that would be a very powerful statement of showing that journalism is more than just a business.
In the book, I'm talking about the remaking of journalism. You recall a conversation with a Washington Post website editor in the internet's early days, and he said, "None of us can predict anything more than 6 months out. This is TV in 1948." But you study that, and also you're in touch, Maria Teresa, with a lot of journalists, and you see where trends are going. So maybe not, we cannot plan ahead or 5 years. Maybe we'll be making holograms in 5 years' time. But what do you see? What should journalists be thinking about?
I think what we have to, I don't know if journalism is going to be in a media outlet, or it's going to be in a hologram, or it's going to be a robot talking to our ear. I don't know. But I do think that journalism as a profession that has a method to verify information and to contrast information independently so that people can have reliable information. I think that's something that it's going to be needed by society wherever it is, and it's going to be needed, especially if we want to have free societies. So I think what we cannot lose our vision is, because there are always passions in this business, and then comes comes something that, like Carlos was saying in his speech yesterday, I think, all the stories need to be 5 lines and easy to read. No, everything has to be put into the mouth of a little how to say, monito. So whatever trends come, so don't lose track of what is it that you're how to say, protecting, and what is it that you're serving the society with. You need to serve good, verified information. Whether it's what's the channel, what's the material support for that, we don't know. It's impossible to tell. But so long as we do that and we have that clarity, I think journalism will be very healthy and maybe even stronger out of all of this transition. We don't know.
Alan?
Yeah, I agree that it doesn't really matter what form journalism is going to take. I mean, I would never have thought, when these things were invented, I never anticipated that people would actually read news on an iPhone. That was one of the many things that I've been completely wrong about. But it's a wonderful thing that information is now can be so cheaply, almost cost-free, that it can be shared. So I never used to worry about how it was going to happen. I think the more fundamental problem is that people don't trust our ability to define the craft that we have. You talked about the Brexit decision in 2016. That to me was a terrible failure of journalism, because most of the British press did not do what journalism should do, which is to say, look, this is a big decision and we're going to arm you with the facts on both sides of the argument so that you can make your mind up. They began by saying, we know what the answer is here, and we're going to tell you on every single page what the answer is, and we're only going to give you one side of the story. Now, that was a terrible failure of journalism. And I think really, as journalists, we ought to be honest about why people are not trusting us, what has gone wrong with our craft, and to go back to the very basics. And the very basics are to say, look, we stand outside society. We are independent from society. And what we can do is to tell you that something happened or something didn't happen, that this is true, that this isn't, that this is not true, that this is a fact, this is a lie. These are very basic things, but they're essential. And I think in many societies, there just isn't the decision. I sometimes, there isn't the discussion about it. I sometimes contrast the British approach to the so-called question of objectivity or subjectivity with the American approach. So, most American journalists believe in something called objectivity. Most British journalists don't. And yet, we just call this thing journalism, and we expect the public to regard this as a craft at getting at the truth. So I think at the same time as we practice journalism, we have to be having a very frank and basic conversation about what our craft is and how we convince people that our craft is necessary.
Okay, so we're going to open up right now for questions from the audience. So if anybody's got a question, there's a question there, and there's another question here.
I apologize.
Oh,
to-
yeah.
Can I say something
just-
very short?
Yeah, give us a minute.
I just have regarding what you said, Alan, regarding trust. I think I'm not that clear about this. I know there are problems with trust, and of course there's manipulation, and of course good media are often harassed and attacked, especially you know that here in this country and in other countries close to here. But still, I also see a passion of readers for their media. They don't trust media in general. But if you ask them about a particular media, oh my God, they can die for that media. They're groupies of that media. They really believe in that media. The fans of El Faro, the fans of Ocote, or the fans of Prensa Comunitaria here, they're really fans. They're close, they give them information, they trust them incredibly. So I do think that this idea that when you ask people in surveys, do you trust the media? No, I don't. What are they talking? Are they talking about the social media, the media? But if they ask them, do you trust a particular media, any media, they're going to come up with a lot of particular media in which they do trust. So I think that there's something about this smaller media or media that are somehow connected to a community that becomes very trustable.
Okay. Should we go to the questions?
Uno, ¿me escuchan? I apologize to Alan because I don't have the good enough English to say this. So voy a decirlo en español y tal vez ustedes me ayuden. Mi pregunta es para los tres, es sobre el tema de los algoritmos y específicamente TikTok. En todo el mundo y especialmente aquí en la región se está haciendo un excelente periodismo tan riguroso y de tanta calidad como los reportajes que hacemos, pero cada vez que subimos un TikTok de 90 segundos, de 60 segundos, en que toda la información está contrastada, toda la información tiene la calidad que tiene que tener por el modelo del algoritmo y el funcionamiento de estas plataformas, estamos contribuyendo a un algoritmo que sus resultados, la evidencia nos dicen es que están destruyendo la capacidad de concentración de las audiencias. Entonces, así como hablábamos de la responsabilidad de los periodistas de escribir contra las audiencias, ¿creen ustedes que también tenemos la responsabilidad de hacer TikToks contra el algoritmo?
Good luck translating that.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat the question. No, Alan already heard it. Okay. Do you want to start?
Yeah, if the question is broader than TikTok and it is about the algorithm, I think this is one of the most profound questions in media today. The European legislation that is the Digital Services Act is just beginning to get at that question of trying to understand how these platforms are designed and whether they are designed to reward controversy, hate, to feed people more of what they already want, whether they're creating echo chambers and filter bubbles. Nobody knows this. It's extraordinary to me that in 2024, the academics I know simply can't agree. So there are some people who say that, yes, we are creating a world of filter bubbles and the algorithm is doing that. Some people at the Reuters Institute in Oxford say there is no such evidence. I think it's a crucial question. I think we need more transparency, and that really only governments can do that. I don't think the American government is. I don't have much hope that the Trump administration is going to do that, with Elon Musk sitting at the right hand of Donald Trump. But I think maybe we have to look to Europe to be in the vanguard of shining a meaningful light inside the algorithms of these companies.
I think that there is something that maybe it's a small contribution, but there's still something some journalists are doing. I saw, like, there's a group in Brazil that is doing a lot of reporting about how the platforms are moderating. And one of the findings is that, for example, Facebook and X are firing a lot of their moderators. They're going to rely more and more on AI, on intelligence artificial, to moderate these conversations. But TikTok, no. TikTok is hiring more and more moderators, and they supported this with a lot of evidence and a lot of interviews with moderators. And what the moderators of TikTok told them is that they are given political instructions to reward this kind of conversation and to suppress this kind of conversation according to an ideological sort of line. And this is just one story. Maybe there's other stories that can say something else. But from the point of view, what we can do as journalists is do more reporting. The moderators are people. We can talk to them. We can put more light to understand how these companies are working. We know nothing about them, and we need to know more. We need more transparency. And maybe governments can make more transparency, but our governments are very small and very weak to compare to these humongous companies.
What's the name of the group so people can look it up?
Paus Fatus.
There was another question here.
Buenas noches a todas y todos. Mi nombre es Marvin Díaz, soy de El Salvador y quisiera conocer, bueno, los dos expertos, si dentro de su trayectoria ustedes en algún momento tuvieron problemas con la desinformación y si nos pueden recomendar a las nuevas generaciones cómo combatir o cómo digamos que las investigaciones o los reportajes periodísticos puedan ser creíbles y bueno, cómo luchar contra la desinformación, ¿verdad? Hay muchos jóvenes y hay varios estudios que dicen de que ya los jóvenes no contrastan, o mejor dicho, el público que tiene acceso a reportajes o investigaciones no contrastan información que circula en redes sociales. Y bueno, quisiera pues que nos pudiera comentar eso.
Alan?
Well, in a sense, disinformation has always been there, and journalists have always had to sort out what's true and what's not true, and the basic craft should be there. The problem is the scale of it now, and that's where I pity journalists today, that they spend so much time trying to catch up with what Steve Bannon used to call flooding the zone with shit. There's just so much. It's almost a deliberate tactic of populists to just pump as much shit into the information system as it can, so that it kind of overwhelms the ability of the information system to cope with it. I mean, I can't think of a clever answer than the basic craft of journalism is the best way of doing it. But I return to my answer about we have to enlist readers, starting with children, to be our allies, because the scale of this is so vast that everyone has to take personal responsibility, so that from the age, by the time you're 14 or 15, you learn not to spread wrong information unless you've checked it yourself, because that's the only way that we can get to the scale to tackle the problem.
We have another question.
Bueno, aprovechando que hay traducción, lo diré en español. No, ya estoy en la cámara. Bueno, sí, solo, ¿qué piensan ustedes de que los medios entren en una conversación sarcástica o llena de humor, rayando con la mofa de la clase política, de los otros medios, incluso los medios oficialistas, como para provocar discusiones? Hay medios que han entrado en esa dinámica y que no necesariamente es un producto periodístico tradicional, sino que son videos llenos de eso, de humor muy negro a veces, pero que tienen la premisa de que al menos están provocando discusión y están llegando a una audiencia que de otra manera no alcanzarían, y que por primera vez están llegando a ese hombre o esa mujer, o que después del trabajo quieren enterarse de qué está pasando, pero también entretenerse. Se puede ser más agresivo incluso con eso. ¿Qué piensan ustedes? Gracias. Soy de El Salvador también.
María Teresa.
I am a super firm believer in humor. I think humor is a great way to tell stories and to do investigations and to put them in a humorous way, in a sarcastic way. I think you can do a lot and you can engage a lot of new people. And we are seeing a lot of media doing that, and it's great. I think it's fantastic. I wrote a book about the best humorists in my country, in Colombia, and one of these humorists almost toppled the government just by making fun of it. He was making fun every day with good investigations, denouncing things, but in a funny way. And the president ended up like, he wanted to, how can you shut up this guy? because there was nothing he could do. Humor is the best antidote for tyrants, I think. So if you are alive after you are humorous with a tyrant, it's the best way. I believe it a lot, and it's been a tool of journalists and of critics and opinion makers for many, for all the time.
Alan?
I agree. I was in Kenya not so long ago, and there's a brilliant African cartoonist called Gado, who absolutely drove the Kenyan and Tanzanian politicians wild because he got under their skin. I think in America you've got John Oliver and that sort of tradition of a satirical nightly show. In Britain we have a magazine called Private Eye. So I think humor can be a brilliant weapon in revealing truth and really upsetting power.
Okay, do we have any more questions? A final one here.
Hi, good evening. My name is Laura Garcia Cáceres from Honduras. Both Maria Teresa and Alan mentioned techniques for collaborating. And I think Guatemala and El Salvador have learned that lesson, but we in Honduras, on the other hand, I think we have not. And I would like to hear some advice from both of you, maybe tips or advice on how we could collaborate with other media outlets in the country.
Maria Teresa?
You have to start small, Laura, not thinking about, huge collaboration, everybody with everybody. Maybe you're doing a story and maybe it has something to do with something in El Salvador or something in Nicaragua or some other place. And you call a colleague, you get to know somebody in one of these meetings, and you say, why don't we work together on this story? You can do this part, I can do this part. That's how collaboration starts. And then when you think about it, it becomes a big thing. There are many organizations now also doing collaboration, like CLIP, for example. We do a lot of collaboration. That's how we work. There's others, you know, CRP, Forbidden Stories, you know, lots of others. But I do think that the best way is to start small with what's on your hand. You know, just you're doing a story about a mining company and you look up who has worked about that mining company some other country, and you just call you see the byline, you talk to the journalist and you say, what have you done there? What do you know about this company? And maybe together or that person can help you grow, and that's already a collaboration. So I do think that you see common problems in Salvador and Guatemala. You can join forces to investigate them together.
Alan?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Maria Teresa has said. I think it's one of the most positive things that that is now possible. It wasn't possible again 15 years ago. I was so conscious when we were doing the Edward Snowden story, which I think people know the British government came into our offices and there was essentially a raid on all our equipment. But I had already got the information to New York, and we worked with the New York Times on that story. And one of the reasons, to be honest, was that it would have been relatively easy for the British government to pick me off, and almost impossible for for any government, the British or the American government, to pick off two world famous newspapers. And so the sense of collaboration, the sense of harnessing the different skills within media organizations, but also the sense of security that it gives you, because you just become much harder to suppress, is one of the most important things that I think, one of the most important developments in the last 10, 15 years.
Okay, I think that's a good point to end on anti-capitalism and collaborating. It's a great lesson to have from this conversation. Thank you very much, Alan, for joining us so late at night from London. Thanks a lot, Maria Teresa, and thanks for everybody. And we'll see you at the concert and the party.
Hola, solo anunciarles que el fotoconcierto tuvimos que trasladarlo